Welcome back, everyone. Up now we have Pejman. Ooh, I hear an echo. Who's going to be going over? Is that coming from you?
I don't think so. Are we good now?
I think we're good now. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Sorry, guys. It's early. Bear with us. Pejman is going to be going over strategies and tools and playtesting with limited resources. I'm going to go ahead and hand the stage over to you. Good luck.
Cool. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Pejman. I'm joining you all from Toronto, Canada. And it's my honor to be here. Before I start, I want to thank the organizer for putting together this conference, especially with the growth in indie development, indie games, and the complexity of this market. I think this is such an important initiative to have, and I was so excited to see that this is such an accessible conference. So I'm again excited and honored to do this presentation. I'm gonna do a quick intro before we get into the main content. So as I said, my name is Pejman. I started my career doing UX research for games back in 2009. I did my PhD at the University of Sussex in the UK. And at the time, we had a very unique setup there that we started the first basically playtesting UX research studio offering this service to the game industry. And this is back in 2009. And there are like a number of games that I worked on at the time. What you see on the screen is probably the most famous titles. I worked there for around 5 years. And in 2013, I moved to Canada. I got a job at the university as a professor, and I've been doing research and teaching around topics related to UX research and playtesting. However, given my industry background, I wanted to be involved with the game industry, and I got so lucky to be able to work with guys at Execution Lab in Montreal. Many of you may know Jason De La Rocca, who runs the Execution Lab. I started working with them as their user research playtesting director. And the focus of Execution Lab, as some of you may know, was primarily supporting indie games and indie studios. So during my involvement with Execution Lab, I got to work with around 26 studios. Some of them are now, among the most famous indie developers in the world. From 2018 until kind of continuing now, I've been doing advising and consulting with games company. Again, a lot of them in the studios, but I also have worked on projects, non-games projects. So I worked on healthcare application and work on robots and different basically platform and technology. The goal of my talk today is to basically summarize some of my key learning from working on this, in this industry, and also kind of a diversity of projects. So from indie game to AAA game to even non-game application. When we talk about UX research and playtesting, I think the cool thing is those knowledge, they all gonna apply, like regardless of the medium. When you do research, those knowledge gonna be applicable. For this talk in particular, I selected, I call it 10 plus 3 lessons and strategies that I feel it's important for people who work as indie developer. There are basically 3 reasons why I think the focus on strategies in playtesting is important, and why is it, let's say, particularly important for indie developer. So the first one is that as indie developer, you are basically operating and competing in the same market as, non-indie studios. So while you may have a different operation style, you still need to create, good quality game to be successful in this market. So making better game is important, and playtesting is one of the approaches that aim to support developer to make better quality game. The other point that I wanted to mention, that given the changes in the like a publishing or funding landscape, I would say maybe 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago, when you would meet a publisher, usually they would go with their gut feeling. They ask for a build, they play the game, and then they kind of decide that, okay, are we gonna sign a publishing agreement or not? Are we gonna invest in this game or not? However, I would say these days that has changed. Now publisher, of course, they need to be interested in the game, but they also look for evidence of commercial potential for your game. So topics such as PR, marketing, community development, they are super important now because they can show publisher that your game has commercial potential. If you already have a community of 100,000 players interested in your game, that's a really a strong signal that make publisher investor more comfortable to invest in your game. And among those evidences is usually result of player engagement, result of your playtesting that could help publisher make those funding decisions. So again, that's another reason why playtesting is quite important these days in this industry. The last point, and that's going to be the core of this talk, is how we can do better playtesting. As I said, I work with many game companies, and playtesting may sound quite simple. You bring some people, they play your game, they give you feedback, but it's very important how we run this playtest, how we collect this feedback, and how we interpret this feedback. Because while they could be quite helpful, if we misinterpret, if we collect data that's not that's not like truthful, we may make decision that actually gonna hurt our game rather than make our game better. So knowing the issues and avoiding them and how to generally do better playtesting, it's super important. And as I said in this talk, I'm gonna go over some of the common strategies that I think it's very important for developers to know when they work on their game, when they want to do playtest their game. So the most common challenge when I work with developer is I need to work with them around what sort of questions they want to answer through playtesting. Are they trying to come up with new design idea? Is that the ideation session? Are they trying to compare their feature A or design A to design B? Let's say you may have two style of a menu design. You wonder which one is better. Are they trying to check if players understand or use feature A the same way that the designers intended? Or are they trying to convince a publisher that their game will make money? So for these different questions, there is always different way of answering. So once, as a developer, the first step would be to understand what you want to know when you want to conduct a playtest, and then based on that, to know where do you get those insights from. So, you could look at competitor games and make some decision. You could do QA if your interest is to look at bugs. You could run maybe internal dev critics play session if you are looking at maybe your your production. If you achieve your production milestone, you may attend expos or marketing session, and in all those cases you are doing playtesting. You are doing a form of playtesting. You have your build, you are playing that build, but the result you get from each of these different approaches are quite different. So for this talk particularly, my goal, my focus is going to be playtesting, where you are trying to improve the quality of the game from usability and UX perspective. So that's what we are focusing on. However, one thing that is quite important, particularly considering the budget and resources that we have, and again, that's something I would talk to I would talk to developers when I work with them, is where we can mix these different sources together. Let's say, can you go to an expo and have players, they play your game? The core interest there would be to get some commercial feedback to see if there are people interested in your game. But can you use those data that you may gather as a way to make your game better? Can you figure out maybe if there are issues with your tutorial design to fix them? So how could you merge couple of activity together? So the key answer is yes, you could do that. Sometimes they could be combined, but again, it's going to be super critical to know when you have a good, and by good I mean reliable, valid data, and when you have a bad or misleading data that could hurt your game. So a lot of things that we're going to talk today, going to focus on helping you differentiate what is a usable, reliable data that you have, and what is a misleading data that you shouldn't pay attention to and you should discard them. So in order to do that, another key point I would say is to differentiate between objective and subjective questions and insights. So by objective, I mean data that are factual, and subjectives are data that are opinion-based. Let me give you some examples. So of objective nature, data is, for example, things like, do player understand what they need to do in the game? Can player perform certain features? So those are all objective. Like if you see a player who cannot pick up a weapon, that's factual. They could not perform the task that you were asking them. If you build a jumping game and players cannot jump between platforms, they don't know which button to press, that's the objective data that you have. If you see how long it takes players to complete a level, and let's say if you design a level for 5 minutes, to take 5 minutes to complete, and players take 15 minutes to complete that, those are objective, factual insights. However, you should be more careful when you are evaluating subjective question. For example, do player like our game? Do they think our art style beautiful? Do they like our music? Did they enjoy playing our game? So these are very opinion-based and are very subjective. And the reason these two are differentiate between these two is important is then you could understand which data you could rely on and which data you should discard. For example, again, let's go back to our expo example. If you have players in the expo coming to play your game, and let's say you have your analytic on, and then you see how long it takes players to complete the game, that's roughly, the amount of time that it would take for them to play outside that expo as well. And it's an objective measure. You could use that reliably. But if you are having a one-on-one conversation with them in an expo setup, and you ask them if they liked your game, and they look at your face and then they tell you yes, they like your game, that's a subjective, that's an opinion, and it's potentially biased because players gonna be in a situation that they are under loads of pressure. They see you, they see the developer, and you ask them if they like your game. It's very likely 99% time that they would tell you yes, they like your game. So that's why you need to be very careful when you ask these subjective type questions. The other point that I want to highlight is to know the different data collection methods that are available, and usually the good idea would be to use them in combination. So kind of going back to that objective subjective questions, I have this chart for you to look at. So if you are looking at things such as game metric, that's an objective measure. It's very factual. If you record number of times that it takes player to complete a level, the path they take, the time it takes, so those are all objective metrics. If you observe them, what they do, that's also another objective metric. But if you ask them to, if you interview them, if you ask them questions, those are subjective metrics. So the usual suggestion would be to combine some of these methods together. In a lot of work that I've done, I see many indie developers, they are comfortable maybe with only one method or two methods and always rely on that. Like questionnaire is usually a method that people are quite comfortable. It's quite easy to use. You make question, you give it to people and ask them to do some rating. But it's highly subjective method, and it's a really high chance that you collect data that it's harder to interpret. It's harder to it's high likely that those data are biased. So that's something to pay attention to and consider when you design your playtest session. I'm gonna show you a video just to kind of show you a different example of these mixed method data together. So here we have a very simple playtest setup. This video is probably from 10 years ago. These days it's even easier to collect this data. So we have a webcam looking at a player, basically sitting position. There are loads of articles, research that suggest how players sit indicate their level of engagement with the game. So if they're sitting forward, paying attention, smiling, that could correlate with them being happy, enjoying the game. If you see they sit back, they look not interested, they look bored, that's the indication that they may not having a good time with the game. We have a controller monitor here that shows which button on the controller player are pressing. These days, you could have a simple I would say a code either in your game or in softwares like OBS that allows you to monitor the button the players are pressing. We have a game feed here in the center, so it's a racing game. You see that we could watch what the player is doing in the game. There is a green dot in the center. That's eye tracking information, so that shows us where the players are looking, and the chart on the bottom that looks at their excitement or frustration level. So some of these may sound a little bit advanced and outside your focus, like eye tracking or biometrics. The intention is not to say that you need to collect all of this. It's just to show you that there are different methods that can work together to give you as much as information as you need. So I'm gonna play this video a little bit for a few seconds. There is no audio. What I want to show you is that kind of pay attention to what the player is trying to do. Look at the controller monitor. The game is a split second. The idea is the players need to drift, collect enough point, and then use the point to modify the environment, like make explosion. So you could see the green dot. You could see where the player is looking, and you could see his body reaction to the event that happened in the game. So I'm gonna play this for a few seconds, and then I'm gonna move on. So one thing you probably notice is the player is focusing a lot from the eye tracking data on the amount of point that he collects from drifting. He looks at the feedback that the game gives him, and then as soon as he has enough point, he tries to focus on what sort of explosion he can make. So again, that was one example of mixing different data sources together. I have another example to show you here. So this is a game that I worked a few years ago. The question that developers had was they asked me to help them balance the difficulty of their game. So there are two let's say, common measure that we could look at in terms of game difficulty. One is how many tries it takes for players to complete each level, and how long it takes them to complete. So we wrote basically simple analytics that looks at the amount of tries. So that's the kind of at the bottom of the chart, and the time it takes for players to complete the level. It's a really long game. It's around 15 hours of gameplay, and what we could do using this data, we could immediately identify in which levels the player kind of get stuck, spend a lot of more time. So rather than, let's say, observing or analyzing the whole game, we were able to identify a number of levels that had a higher difficulty than what the developer intended. So we could easily identify those levels. But then the next question would be, what caused those difficulty? What caused players to get stuck? And then we could use, again, another relatively simple metric is looking at where the player's avatar is in the level. So we could identify where the players got stuck in the level through heat map. So it's a heat map of players' movement in the level. And then we could overlay that with the level design and immediately identify number of areas that player got stuck, spend more time, and or die. So using those two helped us to pinpoint exactly where the issue was, and then we could then observe the gameplay or interview the players and ask them to explain why they couldn't get through that, what made them, what in the level design confused them, and they couldn't understand what to do. So that's why combining these different methods is super critical, and it's going to help us a lot to be able to reduce the time which is usually allocated, assigned to the cost of development in doing this work, and be able to help developer pinpoint the exact issue that they needed to fix. Another common issue that I see when I work with developer is that they struggle with finding representative participants. Again, this is where having a good community development team would be super important, because if you if you have a database of representative participant, then you could easily draw from that database to invite to your playtest. A common issue that I see happening is developers rely on their own immediate network of family and friends. While testing with family and friends could be useful sometimes, especially if you are, let's say, testing the production milestone of your game. Is the feature you develop, is it working? If like you have 5 people playing a multiplayer game at the same time, would your server crash? Like those are the things that maybe friend and family could be super helpful. But when you are looking at, again, opinion related question, like did they like your game? Did they enjoy certain aspect of your game? Feedback that you get from friend and family is usually biased and not super useful. So when I start working with developer, if they don't have a strong community team, I help them to set up a playtester database, which is something that you all can do. It's very simple. For example, you could use a Google form, have a simple kind of a questions to recruit players. There are a couple of things that I would highlight. Usually there is a need to explain to audience what playtesting exactly is, what you are looking for, maybe have a little bit of information around the privacy of the data. Obviously, you need to have their contact information. You need to probably look at where they live if you are trying to invite them to your studio, or if you are looking at like certain market, you probably need that information to collect. I would suggest collecting which language they are comfortable with, because again, the game industry is now a global, obviously, industry. You may want to collect the language, because I actually have a slide later on. It's important to know that the players were able to understand your game. The players were able to understand the questions that you are asking. So it's very important that you know which language they are comfortable with. I usually suggest collecting some information around their gaming profile. For example, how long per week they play game, what sort of genres they are interested in, what sort of platform they have access to. So those information gonna help you in your recruitment. Let's say if you are building a mobile game that currently is only playable on iPhone, then you want to filter your database based on the players that have access to iPhone. So you know that it's gonna help you in your recruitment. One thing I also usually try to collect is to ask them if they developed game before. So I try to avoid playtesting games with other game developer. Usually game developer has a very specific lens when they play game, and that lens is different when we are looking at a real player. So there are many examples of these recruitment database online. If you send me an email or message later on, I'm happy to share. But if you do like a simple search on the internet, you probably find many of these examples. I would suggest to kind of iterate it, make sure that this question is something that fits to your studio's need, and start populating that database when you go to events, when you go to when you post something on social media. Have an opportunity for, again, real player from your target audience to sign up to your playtesting database. That's going to be super helpful when you get closer to your production and then you start playtesting. Again, I just wanted to highlight again that consider the use of language and terminologies in material. So in games, I've seen a lot of cases that developers are building a game using English as the main language in the game, and then they soft launch the game in different countries that English is not the main language, and then they wonder why no one knew what to do in their game. So that's probably because all your instructions in English. So have that in mind when you want to test your game. And also the testing material, as I said, it's quite common for developers to use questionnaire. It's very important to make sure the players who are filling those questionnaire clearly understand the question, as well as terminologies that you use. It's, again, I've seen a lot that developers have certain terminologies that they refer to, let's say, features in the game or even collectible in the game, and they use the same terminology in the questionnaire, not knowing that players probably didn't know that that weapon is called this or that collectible is called this. So it's very important to make sure those terminologies are very clear to player. This would reduce the chance of collecting unusable data. The other point I wanted to highlight is to be very careful on how you decide rewarding your participants. So I've seen from developer who basically saying that they don't want to compensate participants for their time. The challenge with there is you're going to have usually harder time to recruit. And then you have a higher chance of cancellation. Again, when you run a playtest, you probably allocate, very critical time in your development to do playtest, and you don't want participants to not show up to your session. So it's gonna, obviously waste your time. I would recommend to consider, meaningful compensation depending on the time that you are asking, and that make sure that, participants understand that their opinions are important to you. It's less likely for them to cancel. However, it's also important to consider not compensating too much, because then you're going to end up with players that are only participating because they want to make $100 or $50, or I don't know, get a free copy of certain games or whatever. So having that consideration is super important. The one thing that I've seen, a really big problem, that sometimes developer condition compensation to completion. So let's say there were a project it was actually quite interesting. There were a project I was working with. The publisher basically, recruited me to look at the game that they were publishing. The publisher felt that the game has some, UX issue, but the developer were saying that they had contracted other people to do playtesting, and they are very confident that everyone loved their game. So when I got on the project, I talked to developer and I say, why do they think that everyone liked their game? And then they said because all their player completed the like 10 hours of gameplay or whatever they were asking. And when I looked at their study design, I realized that they condition compensation, which was quite a big amount, like $150. They conditioned that to completion. So they basically told their players that they only get compensated if they finish the game. So everyone played the game to completion, but they didn't like the game. They didn't know what they should do. They struggled through it, and that was the problem with their study, that players played just to get the money. So it's again very critical in terms of not biasing your data to have a meaningful compensation or reward for your players, and make sure if you create condition for them, then you may collect some useful data. You're still going to collect data around where they struggle or which feature they didn't like. So that data going to be useful, but the data around completion going to be useless because you condition compensation to completion. So that needs some careful deciding. The other key kind of issue that I see when I work with developer is they sometimes don't test on appropriate platform. Let's say if you are, it's very common. I see a lot of time that developers are focusing on creating a mobile game, which is obviously fine. But then when it comes to testing, they have the build on a PC. So they bring players and ask them to play the game on the PC. Again, depending on your question, you may collect some useful data. So if you are assessing, let's say, the art style of the game or the story of the game, it doesn't matter if they are playing on a PC or a mobile. But if you are assessing how well players are able to use your controller scheme or your controller design, then obviously it's not appropriate to have them play on a PC and then imagine that, okay, they still can able to perform certain tasks on a mobile device. So it's very important to consider that as you design your test and make sure that you are using appropriate hardware for the game. Next point is one of my favorite. I call it avoid priming your participants, and usually it goes into both the testing material that you have and also your environment, your test setup. So I've seen a lot of time that developer, design a quick questionnaire and then or survey, and then they use the language or they write the question in a way that suggests certain answer or doesn't collect the information that they really need. For example, if you ask questions such as, like, did you like our game? Like that's kind of priming question. If you are interviewing them and telling them something like, we worked really hard on this game, tell us what you think, that's priming them. It's going to be very hard for your players then to tell you that there are some issues with your game. So have that in mind when you design these testing material. Make sure that you are staying as neutral as possible, and you are not kind of loading players or guiding them through certain answer. Again, I've seen that a lot. For example, developer may say, this is our favorite feature in the game. What do you think about it? So that usually the player is going to have a positive response to that question. The other one, which is, again, I think it's super important, is the test environment and setup. I remember one of the projects I was working at, we were doing some in-house testing, and we used a meeting room in the studio to have the players come in and play the game. I went there, I set up everything, so we were all ready to go. And then the day of playtest, I arrived there and I saw that the developer decorated that meeting room. So they put all the awards they received, they put like posters of their other titles. And then I was like, what are you guys doing? What are these? And then they said they wanted the players to know that they are a very good studio. They've already won loads of awards. And that's an interesting example of priming players through, again, the test environment. So you want them to be as comfortable, as neutral as possible. And with that, it goes to what I would say kind of social desirability or social pressure. So again, this is like a picture I found on like a usual, let's say, expo setup. If you are using this setup to collect some feedback from player, and then you have a player, you have number of people watching, there are usually 2-3 members of your team talking to player, and then you ask them, okay, give us feedback, what do you think about our game? It's very likely that they're gonna tell you only the positive feedback because they're under loads of pressure. It's also very likely that they modify their play environment because they see that you are watching them. So a really simple setup you could use in your office would be to maybe use a meeting room, or sometimes this co-working environment have a meeting room that you could have. Usually I would recommend having player to sit alone, and then you could have their screen recorded or monitor or watch them from a different room. So on the picture I have it on the top. So that setup probably cost a couple of $100, but it's the players would be on their own. No one is watching them, no one is pressuring them, and they just play the game as they would normally play. The other one is a project that I was it was a kid games I was working on. So I went to players' house because I didn't want. I thought the kids would be more comfortable in their own environment than coming to a studio. And I had a simple webcam that was kind of pointing on the iPad with quite a long cable. So I was sitting on a different basically a different sofa or a chair, and the players were playing on their own. I was recording everything. So again, these are like a simple setup that you could have and avoid biasing your players and collecting, let's say, misleading data. The strategy number 9 or lesson number 9, make sure the build or the feature that you have has the focus or insight that you want to test. Again, I've seen that it's a very common, I would say, mistake that the developers sometimes make. Is they have an environment or they have a feature that they are testing, but that feature is not, let's say, fully ready yet, or the test setup doesn't allow for that feature to test. One example of a project I was working on, and the developer were looking to test the social feature that they had in the game. It was a multiplayer game, and then players were able to communicate through emojis or chat box in the game with each other. However, the playtesting setup they had was they put all the players in a Zoom call together. So they had, let's say, 5 players on a Zoom call. They all were playing together. And then the conclusion they made, they said that no one used our social feature. So let's remove the social feature. No one liked them. And I had to interfere. And I was like, look, the reason they didn't use your social feature was because they were all on the same Zoom call. So they could talk to each other easily. There were no need to use the chat box anymore. So you could not make such conclusion based on that test that the social feature weren't useful. Another example I had was a game I was working, and it heavily relied on kind of a game communication or asynchronous game communication between 2 players. And again, the setup they had was the 2 player was co-located. The build they had to test did not have the feature fully developed. And then I had to go back to them and say, the build you have doesn't let you to test this asynchronous communication between players. So you cannot have that test. So again, very important to consider the feature you are testing and if this game and the environment allows you for such testing. Finally, to end, I also wanted to highlight the importance of prioritizing what to fix. So when you run a playtest, usually you identify a number of issues, and it's very important to decide which of those issues have a higher priority to fix, especially if you are closer to your release date. Obviously, you're probably not going to be able to fix everything. You may want to prioritize, let's say, 5-10 issues that are important. The approach that I would recommend and I would use is to look at two things. One is the frequency in terms of how often that issue would happen. And then the second one is the impact, like how serious is that issue if that happened. Give you one example. Let's say you are building a jumping game, and then you bring some players, and then you realize that the jumping mechanic you have is quite complicated. So because it's a jumping game and the player is going to use that mechanic a lot, I would say that would be a really high priority issue to fix, just because of frequency of players needing to use that feature. In terms of impact, let's say there is the issue that happens only once, but it happens in your first level, and if the players cannot get through that bit, they're gonna quit your game. So the impact of that issue that's gonna be really high. So while it's only happened once, because it happens in your first level and it's gonna stop the players from progressing, that becomes a high priority issue to fix. So these two considerations, the frequency and impact, usually helps me to prioritize what to fix. The usual report that I create after playtest would look like something like this. So I have some form of a color coding that I use that kind of highlights, what is the red, what is the most important issue to use, what are the kind of medium level, or what are the low level issue to fix. So kind of trying to help the development team to again prioritize and focus on which issue they fix. Here another example. Don't worry about the detail that you cannot see. The intention is not to show you all the detail, but to show you like the approach I use to maybe take notes and use that to identify what are the key issues. So here we have 60 players. So each of those column are one player. Each row is a interaction that they had to do in the game. This game was very linear, so they had to go through certain aspects that they had to complete. And I used kind of a color coding. If it's green, it means that the player were able to complete that bit, that interaction easily. If it's orange, they had some difficulty. If it's red, that they had lots of difficulty. And using this style kind of quickly helped me to identify, for example, which are the events, which are the bits with highest level of issues, and which parts have, like, let's say, fewer players struggling with. So again, a way to help developer prioritize where they want to focus. So with that in mind, I think we talked about around 10 strategy or 10 key lessons that I learned in the last 15 years of doing that. We have around, I think, 15 minutes for questions. You're obviously more than welcome to ask your question here. I believe there is a Discord channel for question. You are also welcome to email me or add me on LinkedIn and message me. If this topic was interesting to you, there are two books that I was involved in creating them. You probably have heard of the Games User Research book if you looked at this topic before. It talks about all the different playtesting method and strategies written by colleagues from the industry. Then how these learnings impact game design. There is another book, I call it the Game Designer's Playbook, that kind of summarize all the learning from all this playtesting and how they impact game design and feature that I felt that players pay more attention to and impact their experience more in terms of a design. So these are some resources that hopefully can be useful for you. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions now or later. Thank you all for joining us today and listening.
Awesome job. Let me go ahead and take your slide down. We do have some questions. You ready to answer them?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we have one from YouTube, the real Bob Newbin. Is biometric data capture common?
Mm, so interesting question. So biometric data are very basic signals that's coming from, human body. You are probably familiar with some of them. Like there are like heart rate monitor that obviously look at our heart rate. There might be your fingerprint that you use to unlock your computer. So there are loads of them. So there are our brain activity. There could be our amount of sweat in our skin, so very similar to lie detector. Again, these are very basic measure, and our body react to events that we see, we engage with, and it's a constant basically measure, constant let's say changes in our body that's happening. In games, we could collect these data and then try to map them to events that happen in the game, and then potentially make some meaningful connection. So they don't capture players' comment, but they captures usually changes in players' body or physiological state. Again, if we run, our heart rate gonna go higher. That's a change in physiological state. If you are watching a scary movie, you may feel that your hands are sweating. That's a change in our galvanic skin response. And then if we can measure that and try to map it to event in the game, we may get some information that's not available through other methods. So um, yeah, I hope I answered the question.
I used to stream, and I played a horror game once and got one of those heart monitors that like wraps
Yeah,
around you. And yeah, it's kind of fun to watch you go from being like steady to an incredible spike with a jump scare. All right, we have another
exactly.
question from LinkedIn from Arthur. What should we do when leadership perceives user testing as optional or non-critical to the development of new features?
Cool. This is a very interesting question. Um, the As I said in earlier in my presentation, uh, the game industry is becoming more and more competitive. The And to be successful, at least you need to have a good game. Um, in terms of leadership approach to playtest, I would say there are. It kind of goes with the maturity of that studio or maturity or experience of the leaders. Um, there are a lot to say that there are articles that if you message me, I can share with you. But the education obviously is one aspect, so that could help. Then maybe taking a smaller projects and showing, cases that playtest help other games that could be useful, or also using the game. Like maybe I had that in the past that I said, okay, let me just run one study. If you feel it's not useful, then we're not gonna do it more, and then try to show uh, the impact through that opportunity you have. One thing that I highlighted at the beginning, I said sometimes these efforts could be combined. So let's say uh, if your studio is taking a game to an expo with the focus of marketing and community development, maybe you could say that can use that opportunity to also have a analytics in the game, and then track which characters played more, or which level, how long players played. And then when you use that opportunity and then you show the impact that you could have, then that's going to be super useful. One other thing I would highlight is uh, there is a bit difference, at least in my experience, between indie leaderships and let's say, producers or creative directors in bigger studios. In most indie studios I work with, the leadership team made personal financial investment. Let's say they remortgage the house to be able to build the game, and I found it could be a bit more challenging to work with them and then ask them that, okay, we may need to change a bit of your game. Like, they have more financial and emotional investment in the game in compared to developers who work for bigger studios. So have that in mind as you approach them, that you may need to be more you may face a bit more challenges if you are working with indie leaderships. And that's where, like, again, as I said, education, example of successful project, doing a little bit of work when there is an opportunity and show impact, like those are all things that can help kind of raising that culture and maturity in the studio.
All right, we have another one from YouTube. I don't know how to pronounce your name, and I'm sorry. I'm going to go with Janake. What kind of incentives or rewards would you recommend? Prestige or vanity items?
So I would suggest, if you have a team, like if you have a member in your team that do community development, this might be something to discuss with them, and then see, depending on your game and the community that you're working, what makes sense. I know that sometimes, I work with developer that they had a Discord tag for their playtester and had a special channel that they could provide feedback. Which I think kind of makes sense, but I would say that might be more like a short-term success. One thing I like to do is to provide to establish expectation, to say, okay, if you play test, we're gonna send you a $10 Amazon gift card or something. I would say, look at your audience, talk to your community development team, see what they suggest that matches your game and your audience. Again, it's in some games, they were promised certain skin or certain weapon that is only available to playtesters. So there need to be some discussion among your team to decide what makes sense. What I see and I like to use is to provide a small a cash reward, usually Amazon gift card type of thing, to players, because I think it helps them with that kind of a little bit more commitment to come to the playtest and understand that their contribution is very valuable for the company.
Yannick, I'm very sorry. Thank you for telling me hopefully I got it right that time. I'm terrible with names, guys. All right, we have another one. This one's from LinkedIn. Hello, do you think in the future with AI tools we can replace tests with players?
Cool. So that's a really cool question. As I said in the presentation, I'm a university professor as well. And this topic of AI for playtesting is something that I've worked as part of my research, and we actually develop tools. I don't like to say replace. My argument usually is that, as you see, playtesting is quite a complex process. It's quite difficult. We are relying on engaging with humans, which is difficult. We need to book them. We need to compensate them. We need a space. So if there is a way that we could use AI to support playtesting, that could be really useful. The way I could see it is, if there were a way to use AI playtester to try to improve the quality of the game before we bring real human tester, that's going to be super, super useful for developer. Let's say if you are prototyping different level and you have AI playtester to show how potentially players go through that level, and then once you make those decisions, but once you kind of move away a little bit from your prototyping and then you bring a real player, that's going to be really useful, because then the real player can focus on more deeper issue or deeper experiences. The other thing I would say with using AI playtest early on in development is we are relying on players to experience the game that we hope to deliver. That means your build need to be in a certain level of polish. You need to have a little bit of your art asset there. You need to have a little bit of your sound and audio there. Like, without, if you just give players like a level that is still loads of placeholder, loads of boxes, they probably not gonna have a meaningful experience with it. But for AI players, as long as you tag that object, that this gonna be an enemy, this gonna be a tree, this gonna be a resource, they're gonna approach it that way. So it's gonna be, for them, it's gonna be really so early on in development, where you have those rough prototype, I think that's where AI playtesting can be quite useful. And then we use the real human side when you have a more complete build and you want to focus on a more deeper experiences. So that would be my thought on that. If you are interested in this topic, send me a message, and I'm happy to send you a number of articles. And we also build an open source tool that you could actually use. It's a free open source tool on Unity that you could play with if you want. So send me a message, either email or on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share those with you.
All right, we have 5 more questions. Are you good to do these last 5, or?
I'm available, but okay. I don't know, the next one's probably gonna the next talk is
our next talk got canceled, so we have some extra minutes, but
cool.
We'll stop it at these 5. Okay, so no more questions coming in, but we'll get through all of these.
I have time. I'm happy to answer questions. This is a topic I really care about, so I'm happy to answer as many questions as you get.
I'm glad. All right, so we have one from YouTube from Emily. How would you use playtesting to sell your game to a publisher or investor? Is we've done X amount of playtests a useful selling point, for instance?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I'm glad this came up, because I think it's super important. I don't feel so. I think there are a number of levels when you are thinking from in terms of a publisher-investor relationship. So I would say these days most publishers are aware and value playtest. So if you go there and say that your studio understand the impact on playtest, and you have like a team member who think about it, and you do regular playtest, that would be, I would say, a bonus. They probably don't, like, they're not gonna make that decision based on that, oh, we've done 10 playtests, but they're gonna, if they are aware that your studio has that maturity, that way of thinking, value, let's say, player input in the development, I think in most cases that's a good thing. Where I think it would be interesting selling point is to use the data you collect as the evidence of players engaging and therefore potentially buying your game. So let's say one thing would be to show iteration maybe of your feature or of your game idea that's been influenced through player feedback. So I think that would be quite important to show how you change, how you develop, how you made your game better consistently, having that player focus in your development. The other one, which I think is super important, is when you collect analytics and you show those factual number around player engagement. So let's say if you have a prototype, if you have a demo, and you can show publisher that players played your demo 2-3 times, players engage with your demo completely, like those are really strong numbers that suggest your game has a commercial potential. So I would, if you are sending a report to a publisher based on playtest, I would focus on those 2 things. One is how playtesting help you iterate, make better game, have a better focus for your game, and second, how show number that indicate player engagement. through the number of time they played it, the number of hours they played it, how far they played in your demo. Those are all really important metrics that gonna support, help publisher to make those funding decisions.
All right. From YouTube, The Real Bob Newbin. When do you start playtesting? Why is there a trend to release bad or mid AAA games that don't hit like they used to? Deep question.
So I'm gonna answer the first part of it. That's when do we start playtesting. I don't really have much opinion around the second part on why there could be bad AAA game. Like that's as Ashley said, it's a kind of a deep question. So one thing to have in mind is playtesting, while is a term that is commonly used, it refers to only one of the methods that we have available in terms of getting feedback from our target audience. Playtesting also implies that you need to have a build ready to play. However, it's important to mention that there are other testing methods that you could use early on in development. So let's say if you are at the concept stage, we have a method called concept testing. So you could invite players, you could show them, your concept. You can still ask them to rate what they like, which one they prefer. So there are methods for early engagement with players. We may kind of put a big umbrella and call them all playtesting, but they each have a particular name. The other approach that is quite common early on in development is relying on what we call like a heuristic evaluation. So there are design heuristic that you could use to assess your prototype, your design, without having real player involved in your game yet. So basically, to answer your question, you could engage with players' feedback as early as your concept. The playtesting as a method suggests that you have a playable game, and that usually happen, somewhere in your pre-production probably. Again, if you message me, I can send you some article on that topic as well.
All right. From Yannick on YouTube, it is notoriously difficult for us indies to create big enough communities. How big sample of testers would you recommend to be sufficient to get meaningful data?
Cool. Thank you for the question. So I live, maybe Ash, you want to answer the community part, but the sample size, that's a really important question, and thanks for bringing it up. If you remember, I had a slide, and I don't know, Ash, if you can actually bring my slide back, I can go to that particular slide. I think that's going to be quite useful. Let me just go there. So as I said, it's super important to differentiate between objective and subjective opinion. So if you are looking at objective opinion, for example, can player understand what to do? Can they perform that activity? So these are all objective. Like if you see, let's say 3-4 players cannot pick up a weapon, they don't know which button they press to pick up a weapon or fire a weapon, then that's enough information for you to fix that. So when your questions are factual and objective, I would say maybe around 6 players is enough to help you have a reliable understanding to act on this. However, when you are looking at subjective questions, for example, do they like my game? Then that becomes really tricky. You cannot make such decision with a small sample size. So for subjective type question, I would say that you need probably around 25, 30 players to have a better, meaningful data. So always when you have a question you want to answer through playtest, always think about it, that is it an objective answer, or is that a subjective? If objective, fewer players is okay. If subjective, you need a bigger sample size.
Look at you busting out the slides to give even more reference and stuff. Love it. All right. Let's pop up this one from Pink Aaliyah on YouTube. How can we ask others for feedback on our game remotely? Examples, Google Form, etc.
Cool. Another really good question. So I would say it depends on how much resources you have for playtesting. If you are able to, like contract some third-party service provider, and there are many of them. If you just search like remote playtesting, you're probably gonna see like many of them. So usually those third-party service provider, they give you a platform to run this test. So in most cases, you can submit your build, you can submit your questions, and then they help you. They find players for you that goes through the game, and then they record the gameplay. They have the players, answer the questions and whatever. But they're gonna charge you a little, a bit of money. In most cases, they don't do the study design, or they don't do the analysis of the data. They just help you collect the data. So if you have a budget, I would suggest using some of those services. If you don't have a budget and you want to do everything in-house yourself, there are obviously tools that you could use, such as Google Form, as you suggested. I know some companies they have a Discord Discord server that they try to engage with the community, and then they use that to share the build, and then ask people to as players, as the community, to provide them with feedback. So that's another one that I see people studios using. However, again, it's very important to understand the potential biases that you are creating. So let's say if you are sharing your build on a Discord with a group of players, and then you have one channel for everyone to provide feedback, you may run into a situation that few we call them like a dominant voice try to push their own idea, and then those who are less comfortable with sharing may not share their opinion in such an environment. So there are considerations to have when you are when you try to do things in-house and use services that are not primarily designed for playtest. But I would say it's doable. One technique that I really like, and highlighted in my slide, is to try to have at least simple analytics implemented in your game that allows you to collect some of these data, these objective data, without much of a bias. So if you are able to, for example, track the time that players take to complete each level, track the number of, let's say, maybe which character they pick, which weapon they pick. So if you do some of those tracking, those are the information that you could collect without remotely, and then use those information to adjust things in your game.
All right, let's go ahead and get to our last question. I know other ones have come in. Feel free to join our Discord. I'm going to pop the link right there. Show it. Come join us. We have a channel that you can sit and pick Pejman's brain for as long as he has time. So let's get to our last one. All right, from Yannick on YouTube. About last-ditch playtesting efforts. Let's say we have an indie project with a release within few months, and they have not collected any feedback so far. What course of action would you recommend?
So, I would say it depends on the focus. What are the most concerns that you have in terms of player experience and usability. So that's where I would try to focus my effort. I would say if you are building a game that relies on, let's say, a free to play engagement or distribution model, I would definitely focus on the onboarding experience. I would like try to bring some players from the target audience who never seen the game, new to the game, and then I would ask them to play the game for at least half an hour, 1 hour, and then I try to make sure that the minimum I remove any potential usability issue from the onboarding experience. So that would be where I focus. Again, if you remember the slide I had regarding what to fix, and then talking about frequency and impact, if you are building a free-to-play game and your onboarding is bad, then you're probably not gonna make any money. So that's where I would focus my effort. Again, as I said, it's very much depend on your context, where you want to focus your time. Maybe the developer gonna say that the game, we are quite confident with it, but we are worried about our menu design, or I don't know, our character selection, whatever. Like, they may have a particular concern. I would maybe focus on that. But if nothing has been done, no playtest, and it's a game that relies on, and I think most games these days rely on long-term player engagement to make money, I would definitely try to make sure that the onboarding part is makes sense. So basically the game teaches player the core mechanics effectively. Like, that's the part that I would definitely make sure testing.
Pejman, thank you so very much for all of the amazing information today and for your time. We do all really appreciate it. We'll be back in 45 minutes with Chris Hook, who will be giving a lecture on From Dreams to Demo, the ABCs for your indie studio. So you won't want to miss it. Be sure to come back and chill with us. If you have any questions for Pejman, once again, you can head over to our Discord at discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. We have an AMA channel that's specifically for people to talk to our speakers today. You're more than welcome to join. We also do a lot of really cool stuff in the Discord, so you should join us regardless, because it's an awesome place. But thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks again for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that the audience found it useful. Again, feel free to reach out to me as well. You have my contact detail, and I'm happy to support you.
All right, guys. See you in 45 minutes.
Bye.